Data from the World Bank shows 40% of the food produced in Nigeria goes bad before getting to their final consumer. The 2021 Global Food Security Index ranked Nigeria as the 97th country in a cohort of 113 countries, not the most flattering position. In the index, food security was measured by considering its affordability, availability, quality, and exposure to climate change. Affordability and availability are both impacted by the total amount of food available. And there are two ways you can increase the amount of food available. One is to increase productivity, and the other is to cut down on waste. In order to achieve this, private sector players have been recognized to have the potential to contribute to more sustainable and equitable food systems. The elephant in the room now is how we engage these private sector players to effectively tackle the looming food crisis in the country. Well, Abibat Sanusi, the CEO, Mitchell Martin Nigeria Limited, joins us via the telephone to shed more light on this. Hello and good to have you, Abibat. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Perpetual. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to have you.
Yeah, same here.
All right, now let's start from the very beginning, like by understanding the general role of private sectors in tackling food security in the country. What role do private sectors play? What's the role?
To start with, private sector is the integral body that forms a very critical part of our food production cycle in the country. It ranges from private companies to multinationals to cooperative farming system to family. You see a group of people coming together to own a farm to start food production and all of that. And all of this, there are so many challenges that are being faced by the private sector. Particularly recently, when we talk of security, high energy costs in the country, inflation, talking of security, you see banditry everywhere, you see people's farms getting destroyed. And, since we have enough land, for example, Nigeria has about, let me say, about 70.4 million hectares of land to be cultivated. But then, when people get scared to go to farm, they cannot have access to certain inputs that will be used for all this food production. Of course, it's a major challenge. And when you see the multinational food production companies that can afford to import some of these raw materials to produce this food, it gets to the high cost of this food being produced. So, and with majority of these challenges, governments are trying their best to help militate against it, but then it's still not enough because as forming part of the private sector, most of the people engaging in farming, in food production, and they do it for subsistence farming. That is not enough to feed the population. That was why recently when we heard that Nigeria was importing gari from Ghana, despite the fact that we have quite a number of land to cultivate cassava. We are one of the highest cassava producing country in the continent. Because many of those people that are producing this cassava produce for subsistence sake, not for consumption, not on a mass scale production. Do you understand? So these are the things. We face challenges, we face, so if government can't come in.
All right, let me come in here, Abibat.
Okay.
Well, it's a good one. You've highlighted some of the challenges and all of that. But we're looking at, we all know the challenges. We know what the problems are. And then we're looking at, okay, what role can private sector actually play in tackling these issues that you have mentioned?
Yes, the private sector, for example, one of the roles is, there was a fertilizer shortage for farmers recently, and I think Dangote launched a fertilizer plant in the economic capital of the country, which is Lagos, and this has really helped farmers. High cost of fertilizer. We have this Russia-Ukraine war actually increased the cost of fertilizer because that is where most of all these fertilizers are coming from, importation. So for the launch of this fertilizer plant facility, for example, it has really helped the majority of the private sectors into food production to access this fertilizer, which is the major input all these crops need to grow. And this is one of it. And we have some organized bodies also, like cooperatives, like associations of helping most of these food production platforms to access inputs, to help them, give them capacity building, to help them go back to farm, draft majorly to plans to help mitigate against most of all these challenges. So the private sector since they are the key player, they are the very important part role in food production in any country. So they are trying our best to ensure that this increases further and all of that. And again, there are some associations in which one of it I belong to. They brought in some machines and equipment for farm cultivation and made it easier for farmers to access. For example, harvester for rice production, meat production, and all of that. So when farmers and other private sectors, small private sectors, can access most of all this equipment, it helps them. It increases their productivity and help them access the equipment they need on time. So these are one of many of the efforts private sector putting together to increase the food production in the country to help combat this food insecurity that we're facing right now.
All right, thank you, Abiba, for that. Now let's look at the private sector, which we know is integral to food systems because it produces the vast majority of all the world's food. And of course, it's made up of diverse actors. We have the family farms, we have the community or cooperative groups of producers. I think you mentioned the cooperative earlier. And then we also have the multinational companies, and then we have individuals. Now, it also consists of numerous large and small companies in the supply chain that are involved in logistics, innovative technology, production, processing, retail, and even food service. All of this to ensure that safe and nutritious food moves from where it is produced to where it is most needed. Now, the question is the private sector, or let's say, are the private sector players in Nigeria poised to achieving these things?
With the way the framework works in the country, everything is interwoven between the private sector and the government and policies, public policies. So it is the private sector can, but there has to be a concerted effort. It is not something the private sector alone can achieve. Okay, for example, when there are challenges in the rice production industry, and then the government just comes up with policy of central bank listed quite a number of products that cannot be imported into the country. So this helped to to cushion the efforts of the private sector. For example, in the rice production, when government says you cannot import rice, border closure, and all of that. So the rice production sector experienced high productivity, but then high demand is still not letting the effort show, and it's still not enough. But it cannot be done alone by the private sector. The government policies or stable policies that we have up and down, coming up with a policy today, tomorrow it has changed. So it's not something the private sector alone can do.
All right, thank you. Point taken. Talking about the fact that it's not something the private sector alone can do. We need the support of the government with policy instruments and all of that. All right, you were saying something?
I said exactly.
All right, now let's dive deeper into the food waste, that threatens the country's food security. According to statistics, we know that for every 4 tomatoes harvested in Nigeria, we lose 3 to decay at some point, and that's between the farmer and the consumer. And that cost, and this particular one cost the country $2.4 billion per year. Now, looking at this, how big a challenge do you think it is?
It is a big challenge. It is not only tomato that is wasting away. We have bananas. We have quite a number of them. Oil spillage in the Niger Delta is causing our fishes to die every day, and this is a region that supplies 50% of the fish protein source that the entire country consumes. So it is not only the tomato. For example, look at when tomato juice came into the country. Tomato juice is not owned by a Nigeria, but it is produced locally. If we have more of this, for example, we have a pilot plant by the government, or you understand me, They kind of found out, okay, for every tomato produced in certain region, it gets processed into, tomato paste, other byproducts also. Or we have a machine that helps these farmers preserve, because many of them will not be able to afford this machine. You can have a central machine, central equipment that every farmer, you're coming with your tomato, you're not ready to sell now, or probably it's not being bought immediately. You can preserve it for a certain number of days into the equipment where you can just pay for the service and that's it. Or we have a central place whereby these tomatoes are being bought away, convert them to quite a number of animal feed and tomato paste, so quite a range of products. But as long as we don't have that, we'll continue having food wastage. We'll continue having food wastage every day, not only tomatoes.
All right. Now, let's still talking about food wastage. We're looking at how to solve this particular problem. Now, most farmers in Nigeria are smallholders, and then it doesn't make economic sense to have large-scale storage without, someone acting as an intermediary. Now, let's look at some private sector players. We have the likes of Dangote, Bua, and all of that. What can they do to save the day? Because if we're looking at addressing food wastage, we can also look at storage facilities, So how can these bigger industry players save the day?
They can help save the day. In fact, they are helping. They are saving the day already, and they are continuing saving the day. But it is not what one person or one company can do, because even right now, with everything Dangote, Bua, Belozi, most of all these companies are producing, they are just producing about 3% of what the country consumes. So this means that most of the things that we also consume are being imported. So it is not what one person, like the fertilizer plant, Dangote did the fertilizer plant, is doing other things in the food sector.
All right, I guess we lost connection there. But of course, we're looking at the food wastage in Nigeria and how this issue can be addressed. For her, she says it's not something that the private sector can do alone. We have to act. Well, the private sector has to act with the government with instruments of policies and some other fiscal policies also, can always address the situation. And then talking about storage, she's saying that, well, we have industry players like Dangote, Bua, Belozi, and all of them saving the day. But, I was going to ask her another question before we disconnected, or that we couldn't, hear her again. Well, we'll take a break now, and when we return, we'll continue the conversation. You're still watching Business Breakfast. Don't go away.